All right, so picture this after years and years of living in, what people call the barrio, the hood, the whatever, working with gang members, living in the hood, reaching out to people, doing community development work. God had blessed us to go live in this beautiful mid-century modern home in a relatively nice neighborhood, right? And so now I'm not dealing with shootings or violence or the effects of poverty that we lived in for a long time. This is a neighborhood where people are walking their dogs and it's very, very different now that I live in this environment. And so it really surprised me when I walked out to my truck in my driveway and I just find a bag of dog poop sitting on my truck. Now, I kind of felt like, somebody might have forgot about it, and maybe to put it on my truck, tied their shoe, and then forgot it was there. So whatever. So I throw it away. And then I come out and I find another bag of dog poop, and I find another. And so this person, obviously, I have a neighbor who was upset. They are letting me know by putting dog poop on the bumpers of my cars. And so as I thought about this is weird because I'm not used to the passive aggressiveness. I'm just used to the aggressiveness, right? So, and so it was interesting because, what am I supposed to do about this? Somebody's putting dog poop on my truck. They're upset about something. And I have to decide, what am I going to do about this? How am I going to respond? Am I going to fight? Am I going to flight? Am I going to freeze? Am I going to fawn? Or something else entirely. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And so welcome to the Radical Middle. My name's Tommy Nixon. Last week we talked about and continue to talk about the problem of Jesus. We're in a series on dealing with the problem of Jesus and how he doesn't fit into our modern categories. And today we're going to talk about something way more mundane. We're going to talk about a parking issue, right? We're going to talk about what it's like to live in my neighborhood. So, and this actually matters a lot more than you think it would. And so let's get into it. So how do we respond to tension is really kind of what we're wrestling with today. And what do we do with our instinctive reactions? And what does that reveal about us? And so we're going to talk through kind of those 4 trauma responses. I think we talked about it a couple episodes ago, but we're going to, go back to it, make sure we understand it and how that affects us, why, what the radical middle looks like in a real life situation. So I don't want this to just be ethereal for you. I want you to really understand what it looks like. And the reality is if we can't handle parking disputes in a nice neighborhood, how are we going to handle anything that actually matters? And then lastly, we'll get into some practicals on how you do that, moving with the tension, moving forward with tension. How do you enter that well? And so this is going to feel kind of small, kind of weird, because it kind of is. But really, who cares about parking? But here's what I've learned over the last 25, 30 years of working in the kingdom of God. And what it looks like and how you deal with these small areas of tensions that kind of reveal how you handle big ones. And so our instincts don't change based on the size of the problem. So let's start small and see what we discover about ourselves. So the reality is when you face tension, and there's maybe you read something on Facebook, maybe somebody puts a bag of poop on your car. And you're like, man, what the heck? And how do you respond to that? Now, we've been through this, but let me go through it. There's actually 4 things that we can respond with to that tension of our world, right? We can fight, we can flight, we can avoid it, we can freeze, and we can fawn. And these are all kind of trauma responses to tension and danger and problems. And it's really how, humans have survived for thousands of years, right? So this kind of the tendency of humans to kind of crawl inward, to escape, to lash out, to defend, to divide, to fight, it really kind of creates tribes that are all part of how humanity has survived throughout time. And so when we faced our danger or tension, we have instinctive behaviors, right? And this is how we do this. So The problem in our modern world is that these responses don't actually solve anything. They just keep us stuck in cycles of reactivity. So this is what I mean by that. And I'll use my own parking situation as an example, right? So the fight response is when we attack. We lash out, we defend, we go on the offensive. So it's interesting. So somebody starts putting this bags of poop on my car. And I think it's funny. So I actually do a couple social media posts about it. And the reaction that I got on social media about somebody leaving poop on my car was really, really surprising and interesting. So I thought it was just funny that somebody would be that passive aggressive about it, right? And so, because I come from a context much more aggressive, and because of my trauma response growing up has always been to fight. So I put this thing out, and I had several people that I don't personally know, just randos, that, they literally were like, you're a religious a-hole, because they looked at some of my other content. The reason they're putting the dog poop on your car is because you're blocking 2 feet of sidewalk. Now, the reality is I have a really short driveway, and I have a really old big truck that, someone gave me. So I don't have an option. I can't park on the street, so I don't really have an option. So somebody was upset that they had to walk 2 feet out of the way all along the sidewalk to get around. And so they're leaving poop on my stuff to show me their displeasure. And so, immediately, and honestly, what comes up in me is the fight. Like, I'm like, and then I had all my other people like hit me up like, yo, like, we got to catch this person. You got to put a camera. We got to find them. We got to go to their house. We got to dump a bunch of dog poop on their lawn. Like, it was the full aggressive response, kind of hood response to somebody, messing with me, right? And so we get that. I mean, it's funny, like, people are like, you just let me know, Tommy, we'll show up, we'll handle. Like, literally, like, down to throw. I feel like it's like Toby and Wigway, try Jesus, don't try me, because I throw hands. It's that kind of space where, and I come from that. That's a normal response for me. So in our current moment, like, fight looks like, online outrage, cancel culture, owning people in arguments, winning at all costs. Like, whenever tension comes, if you're those type of people, that's your trauma response. This is what it's going to look like. We got to win at all costs. Everybody's the enemy, like treating every disagreement as a war. If you're not with us, you're against us. So the fight response feels powerful. It feels like you're taking action. But what does it actually does? It escalates. It creates enemies. It makes reconciliation impossible, and it never leads to understanding. The problem with fight in this instance, or in any instance really, in a lot of instances, is it doesn't quite jive with the ways of Jesus. So again, I got to go back to the radical way of following Jesus. I got to wrestle with the truth in the middle. And I go, okay, somebody is upset, and they shouldn't have done that to me. But let's try to figure out, if Jesus is like, you got to love your enemy, what does that look like, reconciliation? And so I'll be honest. I mean, part of me, I want to fight. And I had people that were down with me to go deal with this neighbor. But it was my ego was triggered, right? And after everything I'd done, after living, in the hood for all these, like, after loving my neighbor so well in all these areas, how dare someone treat me like this? And that's just full of self-righteousness. And so I've got to stop, reflect on my trauma response to that, and then go, but what does the ways of Jesus have to say about this? So, and it's so interesting too, like, somebody called the police. Like, I got a ticket in my own driveway for parking in my own driveway because some, passive aggressive neighbor was like, man, they can't block the sidewalk. Literally like 2 feet. You just have to walk around. And instead of just being able to do that, they want to cause me trouble. Now, the reality as we deal with the tension was I was actually blocking the sidewalk. That's true. I've got to actually deal with the truth of what they're experiencing from me, and what does that mean? And just to fight about it isn't the Jesus way. Second, the flight response is as we can avoid, we can escape, we can withdraw, we can pretend problems don't exist. And in the parking situation, I could have just moved my vehicle and said nothing. I could have avoided the neighbor forever. I could have sold the truck, on the trailer that's there that, impedes people's 2 feet of their walkway. I could have convinced myself it doesn't matter either. Like, these are ways that we avoid problems all the time. And so, right. And in our current moment in our society, it could also look like this. I just don't want to talk about politics, religion, race, leaving church instead of engaging, unfriending people who challenge us, retreating into echo chambers. I'm just going to stay positive and not think about it. Like, whatever. There's a lot of different ways that we flight. And flight, in reality, it feels like peace, like you're avoiding unnecessary conflict. But here's what it actually does. It abandons relationship and it leaves problems unsolved. It communicates that comfort is more important than connection. And that's where these trauma responses, right? Like fight, we could just handle this right now and I could show you who's better. Flight is just like, I'm just going to avoid the connection at all costs. And that continues to divide us as people. And so part of me thought after I got through the anger of it was like, you know what, man, I'm just not going to deal with it. It's like I could avoid the unnecessary conflict. And sometimes in my personality, I'm going to protect other people from my fight side, right? So I don't actually want to engage with you because I'm nervous that the fight's going to come out and then, right, we're going to get into a physical altercation or whatever it is in my neighborhood, and that's going to, right, there's going to be a chain reaction to that. But it leaves the problem unsolved, and so, it's like, well, maybe if part of me just want to not deal with it, I could park differently, I could move on, don't make waves. We just moved to this neighborhood, I don't want to mess it up. But did I really want to start something, with people? And maybe I just get rid of the truck, right, and do that. But that wasn't really wise because it didn't, provide for my family well. So I had to deal with that. Number 3, we could just freeze, right? The freeze response is when we just shut down, right? We become paralyzed. We can't decide what to do, so we do nothing. And we can freeze, and our nervous system can stop us from fighting or fleeing. And this can bring about a sense of like hopelessness. And I feel like a lot of you out there have this right now. You just don't know what to do. Like, there's no path to go. And a number of decisions and secondary and tertiary trauma we experience can kind of immobilize us. We can just get to a place where we feel stuck. And the more we learn about how the world has the more how we learn about how the world is doomed and everything we thought was good is not for us is not, the more we can feel that there's nothing we can do about it. This leads us to a place of apathy and status quo that actually just continues the suffering in our world. Like, as followers of Christ, we can't allow ourselves to stay in that place. So we have to, because we're followers of Jesus, we have to fight differently. That's got to look different. We can't avoid relationships by fleeing. We can't feel hopelessness and just be frozen. And so there's got to be a different way. And I feel like, this is like where, like, how many Netflix documentaries can we watch where, it tells us everything we do is toxic and harmful. And like, it just feels like overwhelmed. So we just kind of throw up our hands, like, eat a bunch of Big Macs and, don't care about the environment. You know what I mean? Because it just feels like everything gives us cancer. So why not eat everything? Right. So we can become kind of nihilistic in our thinking, kind of, it is what it is. And that doesn't bring the healing and hope that we need in our world. So we can kind of get to, and that, like, kind of, I think in our cultural moment in our time right now, what freezing looks like is, cynicism, it is what it is. Nihilism, things will never change. Kind of learned helplessness. Like, what's the point? Maybe a lot of you feel that. Like, you just kind of giving up. Look at like paralysis. Like, I don't know what to do, so I'll do nothing. And maintaining that kind of status quo. That's what keeps the suffering happening when good people don't do anything. So, lastly, fawning is really this response when we people please, when we avoid conflict by conforming, by making ourselves smaller, by saying whatever will keep the peace. It's the emperor, has no clothes on, and it's like, oh, whatever, man. I just don't want to cause waves. So, yep, hey, emperor, you're walking through the streets naked, but hey, looking great. Because you don't want people to turn on you. You want to be part of your group. You don't want to be outcast. You want to feel safe in the herd. This is kind of what that looks like. And so when we're faced with tension or trauma, we can also respond by avoiding or diffusing that conflict through like people pleasing. And in response to the trauma and tension overall, we will go against our actual stated values, our beliefs, and our common sense to fawn to a group identity that claims it has the answer and the power to change the pain and tension that is being experienced. I think we see this deeply right now in our politics. And maybe that's why you're searching this podcast out, because you're like, hey, there are things that I like about, that I think are true about, this certain political party, but man, they're doing things that I think are crazy. But what am I supposed to do? There's no other option. So, and if you feel like that, the ways of Jesus is perfect for you. And so, I kind of write about this. It's kind of like we're stuck in that tension of, it's kind of like it's the Christian who professes Christ but sees president as a savior. It's the immigrant who, after receiving status in this country, hates other immigrants and wants to keep them out. It's the liberal who cries out for inclusion while wanting to stop free speech. It's the conservative who wants to stop abortion and is pro-life, but wants to cut any assistance for children after they are born. Like, there's an inconsistency of belief. And that's why this whole framework for the radical middle is because of those kind of things where you're looking at it and you're like, there's got to be a different way. I can't just fawn to this group and go against my stated beliefs and values, and especially the beliefs of Jesus. Like, I have to stand up and say something. But again, if you are immobilized, right? If you're freezing, you don't know what to do. If you're fawning, you don't want to go against the group. If you're fleeing, you just don't want to deal with it. And if you're fighting, you're just being so aggressive that you are just burning bridges everywhere, and you're actually not coming up with a solution. You're just causing more problems. So, in the sense of, this parking situation, right? Let's go back to a real life example. Somebody put poop on my truck. And so I could have apologized profusely, even though I wasn't sure what I was doing wrong. I could have bent over backwards to please the neighbor. I could have immediately sold my vehicles to make them happy. I could have reshaped my entire life around their comfort. So fawning kind of feels like harmony, like you're being loving and accommodating. But here's what it actually does. It denies your authentic self, and it reinforces power imbalances. And it's fake peace built on dishonesty. And that we can't do that either. And I love, Brene Brown actually says that the opposite of belonging is fitting in. Now, I love that. So belonging has to do with being your authentic self and being received, and fitting in is about making sure you fit into the desired group and tribe you have chosen to be a part of. And it kind of fulfills our need for safety, identity, belonging, and purpose. And so we keep on adhering to things that we actually don't believe in. And for some people, I see that if you do that for so long, you actually start dropping your beliefs. And you become less of a Christ follower. I've seen that both on the left and the right. If you're becoming more Republican than you are a Christ follower, or if you're becoming a more liberal than a Christ follower, you care more about justice than who brings it, then you've missed it, right? And so, this idea of fawning, it looks like love. And hear me say that. It looks like love, but it's actually fear. And I see this everywhere in churches and politics and families. People are going along with their tribe even when they know deep down it contradicts what they actually believe. And that's the cognitive dissonance that young people are looking at all of us in the church and people who profess Jesus, and they're like, yeah, I don't want that. Because we are giving them a bootleg version of what following Jesus looks like. And that's on us. And so that's why we have to deal with this. So the kind of a radical or middle response to this is, here I am. I've got dog poop on my truck, and I have to decide how to deal with it. Am I going to fight, flee, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so what does that look like? And here's how the radical middle plays out in my daily life. There's a moment of tension and conflict. Okay, it might be a poop on the truck. It might be somebody says something to me. It might be like the other day, somebody was upset for how I was, parking to pick up my daughter for school. Like, there's a flashpoint, some tension, and so instead of just reacting to it, I'm curious about why someone would do this. I realize that it's because of something that I've done. So I've got to actually be self-introspective about this. And so what I discovered is that some people gently suggested, Tommy, your vehicles are actually blocking the sidewalk. Now, they're right. So when we first moved to this new house, someone called, right, I told you, they called police, I got a ticket. I'm like, man, like my truck was like on the sidewalk. That's true, but this was a culture shock to me because I just thought, who freaking cares, right? But people in this neighborhood, they care about this stuff. So the person leaving the dog poop and the upset people online, they are not wrong. The truth of the matter is my vehicles are encroaching on the sidewalk. That's true, right? I shared with you our driveway is really short. The garages are too small for these vehicles to fit in. So we felt like God blessed us with this house. So saying no to that because, saying, no, I can't move here because our vehicles, go 2 feet on the sidewalk, that's like ridiculous, right? That's not wise. I feel like God blessed us with this, blessed us with these vehicles that we have. So I'm not going to say no to that because our cars don't fit in the driveway. That's foolishness. But they still do cover some of the sidewalk, and someone's upset about that. So I got to take that seriously. Suddenly, I understood this wasn't random. This was someone saying, your vehicles are in my way, and you're not getting the message. They were communicating only in the way that they knew how. So their trauma response, like I imagine they have never had good enough conflict where they could just come to my door, say, hey, I'm your neighbor. Listen, man, your truck's impeding on the sidewalk. Can we do something about it? Yeah, we could figure out a solution to that. They never did that. And that's probably because of their own trauma response. So here's what I did instead. I stepped in the tension, and that meant a few things. Number one, curiosity instead of reaction. Instead of just reacting to it, I'm curious why someone would do that. I realize it's because of something I've done. I examine that and I acknowledge that the situation has more nuance than, just simply like you got to get, you can't live here or you got to get new vehicles. And so when I start asking that, what's the story they're telling themselves about me? What have I actually done to contribute to the situation? And so instead of assuming malice, I just get curious about it. Number two, I acknowledge truth on all sides. So the person leaving the dog poop and the people upset online, they're not wrong. That's true. My values of following Christ compel me to love my neighbors as myself. So they also lead me to care for my family and live wisely. So our financial situation doesn't allow me just to get rid of the vehicles and to put my family at risk, but I'm also concerned about loving my neighbors no matter what they believe or how they act. Like, that's the radical part of following Jesus. Like, it doesn't matter, right? I'm choosing to live out my values that way, so I've got to figure out how to live that out. So, yeah, my vehicles are approaching on the sidewalk. That's true. Yeah, they could have communicated that different. That's also true. Yes, I have financial limitations where I can park. That's true. Yes, pedestrians have a right to use the clear sidewalks. That's true. And none of these truths cancel out the others. That's also true. So third, I got to recognize competing values, right? Like, my values of following Christ compel me to love my neighbors and as I love myself. They also push me to care for my family, right? So I've got to figure this out. All of these are valid. They're in tension. That's okay. The radical middle isn't about resolving all tension. It's about learning to live it faithfully. So then fourth, I move towards connection, right? The solution for me is to step into the tension and connect with my neighbor to figure out and understand them better. It's to actually have the conversation with them. Now, I tried to do this. I tried to figure out who it was. I put a sign up that said, hey, I'm so sorry that this, this blocks of, I'd love to talk to you. Come talk to me. And so I really tried to engage. What does reconciliation look like? How can I get to know my neighbor? What is that? How do I move towards connection? And the reality is they just never reached out, and they stopped. And I mean, every once in a while I find some dog poop, but so I started trying to park my car out of the way, right? I tried to figure out how to love my neighbor because I could not figure out who it was so that we could actually have the connection to resolve this in the ways of Jesus according to my values. And so I'm trying to figure this out, right? So the radical middle, as you work through this, it actually gives you the ability to hold multiple truths at once, to stay curious instead of defensive, to move towards tension instead of away from it, to value a relationship over being right, and to see the image of God in my quote-unquote enemy. And so I write about this. I'm like, if you're reading this or you're listening to this, it elicits an emotional response about how horrible my neighbors are or how much of an idiot I am. I'm glad that you're reading this book. I'm glad that you're on this podcast. That story is about parking, yet we have so many other bigger things. Like if you hear this, so if you hear me and you're a friend of mine, you're like, dude, what's up with this person leaving dog poop? Or you're like, yeah, Tommy, you're kind of an idiot because of this. Like, can you just enter into the nuance with me? Can get this space that we're framing called the radical middle of the ways of Jesus? Like, is there a different response? Can I engage my neighbors differently? Can I love them well while also loving my family well? There is another path. We can do it. Now, the neighbor just never, I don't know if they were shamed by the sign or what, but, it stopped. But that's actually not what I wanted. What I wanted was a connection with my neighbor so that we could actually figure out, man, could we come up with a creative solution that loves you well, loves me well, and we can come together and do that? Like if we can't figure out parking, how are we going to figure out immigration? How are we as a body of Christ going to figure out the issues of racism, the disparities between rich and poor, like these type of things? Like if you can't figure this out in your day-to-day life, what does that look like? I remember one time in another neighborhood I lived in, you had to drive through the neighborhood to get, to the freeway. And I was late. I was driving really fast. And as I'm driving fast between stop signs, right, this lady who's on a walk, older lady in the neighborhood, yelled at me. She was like, yeah. And I think she cussed at me or something. I hit the brakes. And one of my kids was in the car with me. Hit the brakes because it made me upset. And then the Spirit of God came over me. I reversed it. I rolled down my window. I'm sorry. What did you say? Right? Again, my fight started to come out. And she said, you need to, she's cussing at me. You need to slow down. And in that moment, I looked at this lady and I said, you know what? You're right. I'm so sorry. I'll slow down. She was not ready for that response, so much so that she made some weird, she was just like, like she made some weird laugh because that wasn't the response she was waiting for. Her trauma came out. I could have responded with my trauma response. I didn't. I chose a different path. I owned it, apologized, and I said, I'm sorry, you're right. I need to slow down here. It's not worth hurting somebody in our neighborhood for me to make it to a place on time. Would forgive me? And then she didn't know what to do, so she was like, okay, and she was super nice. And I drove off. Like imagine our world over and over again with those kind of interactions on the ways of Jesus. And so if we can't figure out parking, how are we going to figure out all these other ways? And I think that we've just kind of lost the ability to engage. And so on the next episode, we'll talk about ways to do that. But I just want to frame that for you to go, man, this is the problem that we're trying to figure out. This is why I've constructed a framework for this. This is the ways of Jesus. But to help us bring it down to, granular levels of going, look, these flashpoints happen all the time throughout your day. Things that make you upset, things that make you shrink away, things that make you fawn, things that make you, that immobilize you because you don't know what to do. That person who did that post and you're so offended by it, you don't know what to do. And so this happens all the time. And the ways of Jesus have an answer to it that you have to enter into. It's not that We cannot live in these trauma responses anymore. There's got to be a different way. I think that way is the radical middle, the ways of Jesus. I hope you do too. Thank you guys so much for journeying with me. I'm Tommy Nixon. Thanks for walking the path of the radical middle. Make sure that you subscribe to this. Join the newsletter on tommynixon.org. You can get more stuff. You can learn when the book's coming out. There's things that I can send out to you that are free, that'll help you along this path. But I hope you just journey with me on this as we figure this out, because it is a daily thing that you and I get to walk out, and it helps us shape us instead of deform us. And I hope that's helpful to you. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.